our keynote for the day, Jeetu Patel, and I want to give a quick introduction and then I'll welcome him. So Jeetu is Executive Vice President and General Manager for Security and Collaboration at Cisco. And more importantly than the official title, he is one person that I absolutely look forward to learning about product and product strategy. So if you want to learn about technology and product, I would strongly recommend that you follow him on LinkedIn and Twitter. His wisdom and a lot of insights that he shares very, very openly about how he thinks about product and strategy is absolutely amazing. And I learn every day. This is all about learning. This summit is all about learning. And I learn from Jeetu almost every day without getting a seat on the table with him, just virtually learning on Twitter and LinkedIn. So thank you, Jeetu, for that. Despite running tens of billions of dollars of business worldwide, he does that and keeps shares his insights on LinkedIn and Twitter. He's running, as I mentioned, a very large collaboration and security business. He's also redefining the SaaS strategy and helping Cisco transform, into a large growth business in software. Prior to this, he has 20 years of experience in enterprise software. He was a chief product officer and chief strategy officer at Box, that company that we all know as amazing success. So with that, I would love to welcome Jeetu Patel back to our 7th annual conference here.
Carl, thank you for having me. Appreciate the kind introduction.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's exciting to have you back here. And you and I were chatting earlier this year. Actually, we had a small webinar, and you were outlining just the big picture future of work strategy. And I saw the rebranding that, when you came into Cisco from Box and, WebEx was called before you, it was like, obviously was a pioneer and the original collaboration software, but then you moved it up to a whole different level, which is talking about the big picture vision of future of work and not just, one of those many collaboration software. So, and then not just defining that big vision, but over the past 6 to 8 months, just since you and I spoke, we've seen so many acquisitions, we've seen so many organic development and announcements on technology and innovation and upgrades and everything, and we are loving it. We use WebEx as well, and we are loving all those enhancements and upgrades that you're doing. So tell us how have things transpired over the past, since this year, starting of this year, and how all this accelerated pace of innovation, both inorganic and organic, is all happening, and how is that vision coming up?
These are very, very kind of exciting times to be in tech. Just because if you think about the way that people work, it's going to materially get altered over the course of the next decade. The next decade is going to look nothing like the past 200 years in the way that people work. And the reason for that is, I think we've seen now, because of the largest experiment that was run in humanity over the past 18 months of people overnight working remotely, that there's no longer a debate that people can be in a distributed environment and work gets done, and in fact, the economy can thrive. And so we now are at this kind of juncture where, a lot of times the question gets asked, what does the future of work look like? And we think the future of work will be hybrid, where people are going to, sometimes work in the office, sometimes they're going to work from home, sometimes they're going to be somewhere in the middle. And I think, the obsession on the experience for the user and the obsession on making sure that you have customer centricity is going to be even more important, because hybrid is going to be a harder reality to adjust to with this mixed mode than when everyone worked in the office or when everyone worked at home. And so the way that we see it right now is the way in which there's about 3 billion digital workers on the planet. 1 billion of them are knowledge workers, 2 billion are frontline and field workers. And I think for the first time, credibly in history, we are at the point where you could reasonably forecast that these 3 billion workers could, at some point in time in the future, have equal access to opportunity, regardless of their geography or language preference or personality type or socioeconomic level or tech proficiency level. You should be able to participate equally in a global economy. And I think that is superbly exciting. Now, what are we doing about it at Cisco? Well, the way that I think about it is you have to be very reductive in the way that you prioritize. And if you can build great products that put a smile on people's face where they love the product and they talk to their friends and family about it, that's 99% of the game. And that's what we've obsessed in doing. And so we've added, about 1,000 features in the past 12 months in the product. We've obsessed on quality and performance and reliability and, the responsiveness of the system, where we think we're now the very best in the market. And the other thing that we did was to augment the areas where we wouldn't have been able to move fast enough. We made 5 acquisitions. Wow. And the beauty about that was we integrated those acquisitions on average within about 45 days from the announcement of the acquisition. Wow. Into the product, so that hundreds of millions of people can get the benefit of that. And I think that combination of what the team has done is super exciting. And I think there's a huge upside over here. And the upside is not just that, it's good for Cisco or it's good competitively. The upside is if we are all successful in making this transition to hybrid work a reality, not only is it good for individuals who can access opportunity from anywhere in the world, whether you happen to be in a village in Bangladesh or you happen to be in the heart of Silicon Valley, you should be able to have the same opportunity. But the second area that's really interesting is for companies, you get global access to talent. And, there's so many jobs that go unfulfilled, and there's so many people that don't have jobs. And that just doesn't seem like the right combination when you can't have both those conditions hold true, which they are right now. And so how can we make sure that actually gets more, in a state of equilibrium where there's, the demand and supply kind of are able to go out and fulfill each other. And so we're pretty excited. I think there's a huge upside, and if done right, I think it's going to be a huge upside for humanity in general.
Yeah. Well, 5 acquisitions in just this year, 9 months, and thousands of features that you've rolled out. So tell us, in this pandemic, and you guys are working as remotely as probably on the extreme. How do you even do that? What was the learning like? Using your own technology. So you're using WebEx. Many of the founders that you acquired, you probably never met in person or their teams, and you said 45 days of integration. That's amazing, because we know, coming from a venture capital world, I know we say that acquisitions are easy, but integrations are hard. That's so right. Is there anything that you learned that some of us, as we are working all, hybrid and remote, how were you able to accomplish so much? Is there some cool tips about using WebEx better that as an insider that we don't know?
The first thing is, I think it's more cultural than it is anything else. And so what was interesting was I joined Cisco in the midst of the pandemic. Yeah. So for the first 9 months, not only had we not met the companies that we were acquiring, but I had never met any of the members of my team or my peer group for the first 9 months. I'd only met Chuck Robbins, who's our CEO, a couple of times. And that was, so going into it was just interesting to see on how close relationships got built in this virtual medium.
Wow.
And I'd say that the big secret over here is, I think if you look back, we have given an unnecessary level of importance to geography.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's very damaging to society when that much importance is given to geography. And what I think the past 18 months have proven is that geography doesn't matter as much as long as the culture is right, the coordination is right, the tech stack is right. Now, I will say one thing: this would have been impossible to do if COVID happened, let's say 30 years ago or 20 years ago, where, pre-internet days and pre all of these kind of sophisticated technologies. I think it would have been very, very hard to project this level of economic growth with this happening. But the way I think about this is, like Amazon could not have been built until the railroad infrastructure and the road infrastructure and the airplane infrastructure and the transportation infrastructure was in place, and the US Postal Service was in place. And all of these things that were required on top of which you could build a company, which then took advantage of all the underlying infrastructure. And I think we are now in a similar space where this was not something that you could have credibly thought about 50 years ago, because you didn't have all the plumbing and the infrastructure in place. But today, we've got the internet, we've got video technology, we've got the ability to have, voice over IP. We've got the ability to make sure that you can have collaboration technology that can really go out and be real time and immersive. We've got the cultural mind shift that's occurred where people are okay. In fact, we did a hybrid work index recently, and we found that 64% of the people, if they didn't have an option to choose where they worked, it would determine whether or not they stayed at the job or left the job. 64%.
Wow.
My guess is that number was way lower 3, 4, 5 years ago. Right. People didn't say, well, if I have to go into the office every day, then I'm not going to stay at this job. Like, that was not like the common thing to think about. Now 64% of the people are saying that. So I do feel like there's this kind of shift that's occurring. But I'd say the success for Cisco was the culture of constantly making sure that you're proactively engaging with employees, so that you're not just doing it from a standpoint. And I give a lot of credit to our chief people officer, Fran Katsoudas, who does an amazing job. And we had these kind of check-ins on a weekly basis with the entire company. I think it was weekly or bi-weekly when we first started, and then we made it more frequent, and then now we've kind of tapered it down a bit. But the check-ins were so important because we talked transparently about very, very different range of topics with 75,000 employees on a call.
Wow.
And what that did was allowed people to actually just bring themselves to work and not have the pretense. And so, in fact, in some ways, the interactions got a little bit more authentic because people got to see, like, I have a rule in my place that my daughter can come into any meeting at any time, and she can sit down and say hi, and she'll say hi to the people that are there, whether it be, other than broadcast interviews that I might do on TV from time to time, she's allowed to come in at any point. And the beauty about that is it actually allows people to see the human side of me rather than just seeing the side that's talking about, the professional component. So I do think that there's a very positive outcome that has occurred from this, which is people have connected more in different ways. And then there's some things which have actually not been as great. I think the mental health and well-being aspects are things that we have to be a little bit more proactive on, because fatigue factors are pretty high and burnout is pretty high. And so while productivity has been good, we do need to make sure that we take care of the other dimensions, and that there should be boundaries. And at some point in time, people can't just keep working all day long, 18 hours a day. And so those kind of things, I think, have to still be sorted out. But over time, what I don't think is necessary is I think the substitute with virtual is almost as good as being in person.
And I love the fact that, even being here in Silicon Valley, and as tech people, we get caught up with too much tech innovation, but you've always been a leading voice about the human side of it. And this is something that many tech companies ignore. And you particularly brought up some very interesting things when we met earlier in the year about taking into consideration some very, very small nuances about how to make everyone feel equal, even in an online meeting, that people who are, some people, as your hybrid work strategy and vision that you mentioned, some people may be in office, and if people, the others who are not in the office, shouldn't feel disadvantaged. Tell us a little more about that, because I think that really touched my heart, that, how beautifully you guys are thinking to the smallest little things.
Yeah, the way that we think about this is, inclusivity is a really important dimension of hybrid work where, if people don't feel like they're heard, then this whole model breaks down, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone should feel like they have a seat at the table, regardless of what the table is geographically. And
I
so,
love that.
and so how do you institute that and make sure that you memorialize that in the way in which you work on a daily basis? Well, let's just take a few things that happen. Typically, in a meeting, about 47% of the people in a meeting are likely to speak. 53% of the people in a meeting don't end up speaking.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one or two things that you can think about from that standpoint. First one is, if 52% or 53% of the people don't speak in a meeting, chances are they don't need to be in a synchronous meeting. They can probably listen to the recording, at least a portion of them, right? And the second thing is how you facilitate a meeting so that more people can engage in a dialogue is actually going to be much, kind of a pretty important dimension. And so how do you make that happen at scale? So depending on the class of meeting that you have, we actually thought about that and said, well, what are the personality types that don't speak in a meeting? Well,
Yeah.
oftentimes the extroverts suck out all the oxygen in a room and the introverts stay quiet and listen, right? But sometimes the most important things that are said are the ones that say very few words. And so it's important that a facilitator of a meeting is able to bring that out of the introverts. One of the features we are building in the product right now is called Roundtable. And Roundtable is a feature where everyone gets a chance to speak once before anyone can speak twice.
Wow.
And how does that manifest itself? Well, let's say that you're in an interview with people that you're doing for a candidate, and there's 6 people that interviewed the candidate. All of you are coming into the room to say, hey, do we hire this person or not? And if it's someone like me, like I usually will get excited about someone, and I'll come in and, there's a higher ranking person in the company, and he'll go out and express his opinion. And then everyone else is like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't, pick a fight with Jeetu, and I'm just going to stay back. And instead, what you can do is, as a host, is say, everyone gets 2 or 3 minutes, and you go from the least senior person to the most senior person, and let everyone actually say their piece. And once everyone said their piece, then we can debate it out. And we actually got this thing. This was inspired from the Supreme Court, where they actually talk about, they institute some of these pieces in the Supreme Court. So that's an example. The other example is pause, even if it's a large meeting, and engage with the audience and ask them for input. So one of the things that we did was acquire a company called Slido, and that's an audience engagement platform. So even if you're presenting, like I have about 12, 13,000 people on my team. When I do an all hands meeting, I'll start out by issuing a survey to everyone, or asking a question, how is your day today? Or how are you feeling today? And you'll immediately get back people saying, I'm feeling happy, sad, depressed, angry, frustrated, excited, anxious, whatever the sentiment might be. And before you say your first word, you have a pulse on how 13,000 people are feeling, because there's a dynamic word cloud that's getting created. And those kind of things, I think, are pretty important that you institute culturally into the way and into the norms of how you operate the business, because that makes a huge difference in how people feel included. And if you feel included, actually, and if you feel heard and listened to, you can do your best work, because that's when you get excited to contribute. No one gets excited to come in and take orders. People get excited to contribute ideas. And so we found that this actually changes the performance of the business when you do it in the right way. And so inclusivity is not just the right thing to do because it's good for business, and it's the right thing to do. And so when people ask me, why are you so passionate about it? Is it because you have a daughter? It's like, no, it's not because I have a daughter. It's because it's 2021. And there's no other way that we should operate than the way where everyone feels like they have an equal voice. And then, of course, there's going to be a decision hierarchy, and you make the decision, but you've gotten input from everyone, and that actually creates for a more organic, dialogue. And the best idea ends up winning, rather than hierarchy always making decisions, which is just a very antiquated way to look at things.
Cool. Well, I love your quote, and I'm going to copy and borrow your quote that everyone should have a seat on the table, no matter geographically where the table is. And what I really like about what you said afterwards, this ability, and that I think only the technology brings, because one of my frustration in meetings, whether it is physical meeting or online meeting, is exactly what you said, is that some people just don't say a word. And I'm like thinking that, should I nudge them, push them? Maybe I might sound like pushing to them, so I don't want to say anything. But at the other time, I'm like thinking, are they not happy? Are they not agreeing? What's going on? If it is digital, they're just on mute. They're not probably sometimes turn off their video. If it is physical, they're here, but they don't speak up. So I think that feature that you mentioned, to me, it feels like the most killer feature, that everyone has to say something or gets to speak before anybody else gets to speak the second time. Oh my God.
I'll take all this. Probably three things that are important for people to take away in this one. There's a trifecta that's happening right now, where there's a technology component that all of us think about when we think about what the future of work's going to look like. And that's very important, and that will continue to be important. And IT will be very involved with companies in making sure that happens. The second component is the people and culture and employee well-being dimension, which is really, really important. And then the third area that you're seeing a lot of collaboration with is the facilities management side. And so how do you physically structure spaces, and how do you make sure, like 98% of the meetings that will happen in the future will have at least one participant that's not in the same physical location as everyone else.
Yeah.
Most people say 98% of the meetings will have at least one remote participant. I don't like using the word remote, because we should take out remote from our vocabulary, because every location should be a first-class location. And so if you have remote taken out of the vocabulary, and you have that level of participation, participation, you want to make sure no one is feeling left out in that conversation. So IT, HR from a people culture standpoint, and facilities all come together to actually make this secret sauce happen. And in the absence of any one of those dimensions not doing their bit, it becomes a very disjointed strategy. And I think you leave some opportunity on the table.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Look, IT and HR has to come and work together. And speaking of HR, we have a number of CHROs and CLOs in this audience in our community here. And one of the things that we are trying to do with WebEx, actually, and what we do here at Edcast, is that we look at meetings that we go into using WebEx, and we think of three things that you and I have talked about: before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. How do we help people prepare for the meeting? How do we make them get access to knowledge and content so they're more productive in the meeting? And then after the meeting, we want people to have an easy way to follow up on that meeting, or if you missed it, get access to content. So that's our business.
Continue the conversation. And continue the conversation right after.
Continue the conversation, exactly. And we call this as our definition of employee experience. But I would love to hear, like, how does that EX plays into your vision of future of work? And is this something that we've built an app which is already live on WebEx Marketplace? So thanks to your team, they've been amazing to work with. How does that play into your vision of EX?
Look, I think we are pretty aligned in this one from the first time we met, Carl. And I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, it's extremely important that conversations aren't thought of as a single discrete event, but they're thought of as a continued, kind of evolution of, ideation doesn't happen typically in moments of epiphany, where this one moment where I came up with this thing. They tend to build over time, right? And so the employee experience aspect that you're talking about, what we've really valued about the partnership with you folks is, I think it's important that when you're in the context of a meeting synchronously, that it's very easy to be able to get into a system like Edcast, and that there's a fluidity between WebEx and Edcast. And so our app framework that we've put in place that you folks have integrated with, and by the way, our teams love working with your teams, and I'm really happy to see that the integrations have come together. That's an extremely important dimension, so that you just take out the friction for the user when you happen to be in a certain context and you want to go out and access something else. And that's a very common way that people will work, which is they will have multiple systems from which data needs to be taken. But you want to make sure that they rely, and companies will rely on all of us as a vendor community to say, just make your stuff work better together. Like, I've invested in you and I've invested in Edcast, and it's your jobs to just make it work better together. And I think we owe it to the customers to do that. So that's the first piece, which is the power of the ecosystem is non-trivial, and no individual company can outrun the collective velocity of the ecosystem. And so you have to make sure that you're actually tying into the ecosystem. The second thing I think that's pretty important is what happens before and after a meeting. And the meeting itself, I think that given how we are all operating right now, look, Nishchai lives in India. You live in California and I live in California. We've got a time difference among us. And how do you make sure that when you want to talk, not always is it convenient to make sure that we actually have asynchronous meetings. So async modes of communication will actually get very prominent as you move forward. So the combination of async modes of communication and then tying in with different kind of systems when you are synchronously communicating, so that you don't spend the time to go out and have to putz around with different logins of different systems, and all of that happens in one place, just makes it a whole lot easier. So the way that we see it is the power of the ecosystem is really important. We do have a real constraint with geography, with time zones, and you have to make sure that you can obviate the need for time zones. And so what you do is your concept of before, during, and after is very important. If you prepare effectively for a meeting, get the meeting done, but then continue the conversation after the meeting, you've actually gotten the best of both worlds. And it reduces the burden of people always needing to find constant synchronous time. Because if we're a distributed organization, chances of us having an 8-hour common block from which to pick is not possible, right? Because you're probably going to have an hour and a half, and that's if you're working a 12-hour day. So you have to make sure that you actually find creative ways to solve against the time zone constraint.
Yeah, the time zone constraint definitely creates the burnout. Absolutely. I mean, all these amazing insights, Jeetu, so much. Thank you for that. I know we can keep going for forever and talk about these topics, which we are both very passionate about, and our companies. So thank you once again.